So thank you so much. First of all, thank you to Tanya for having me. Your singing this morning reminded me of first failure I remember in life. I was the only person who did not get accepted to the school choir. So you won't see me sing, but you will see me rap, possibly. So I will talk about a little bit about today the topic that I think is absolutely fascinating, which is the human nature, the messiness, nonlinearity, and complexity of us as human beings, and with the lens on fear. And first of all, how many of us have ever failed? How many failed this week? How many of us managed to fail before breakfast today? There you go. And so the bottom line of my talk is actually both fear, failure, and success are constructs. And they're very often psychological. And so what it means to succeed and what it means to fail is the inner game between our ears. And so this is the space I specialize in. Very quickly, I'll talk about who I am, who's standing in front of you, who's the genocide researcher. Why should we talk about fear? Why should we talk about the human nature? Why do we have to remember of the slowest piece in the whole system right now? And how can we actually hack fear? I would like this to be actually also interactive piece, and so I'll ask you questions. I might ask you to do some exercises with a neighbor, so look around and smile to a person next door, because they might be a very short-term therapist for a second. So a little bit about my life. I think the Peanuts captures well. My life can be described as one sentence, and they go as planned, and that's okay. Anybody else shares that sentiment? We make plans. In Polish, we have a saying, the humans make plans and gods laugh. And so this is my life. I started as a researcher. I worked with some of the brightest people in the field of psychology. I ended up dropping out, putting my PhD on hold literally 6 months before I defended it to become an entrepreneur. And I like to say, Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college, I dropped out of PhD, and so we have something in common. I've seen many startups fail. Some of them got acquired. The latest one is called SelfHackathon. SelfHackathon kind of got a lot of stride. It's an interesting place where we actually combine science, business innovation, and technology. And we believe that the future actually belongs to people who use data in a smart way to actually help humans. And so who are we? This kind of got all over the place. The people that I represent, the people I work with, are mostly scientists, psychologists, neuroscientists, and data nerds. And so we create a network of very powerful people, very smart people who actually think about how to take the knowledge out of the academic papers, out of the ivory towers, and bring it back to people. So I'm actually going to skip the framework because I don't think I have time for that. But I went to a workshop yesterday with John from TEDx Melbourne. Are you here? He might be here somewhere. He said, just think about one thing that you want the audience to take away with you. And being an academic, I just go and rumble. And so I decided to distill my message into 3 take-home messages. The first one is, when we talk about failure, it really is about hacking fear. And fear, just as it is very ancient emotion, it is also very smart, right? We were equipped with a neural cortex that actually allows the fear to evolve just as we evolve. And as we get smarter, our fear gets smarter. So yes, there's a saber-tooth tiger, and that's what we fear, but we also fear many other things. We fear technology, right? Where does that fear come from? Well, it has evolved together with us. And so I will talk a little bit about our relationship to fear as human beings. And ultimately, when we think about hacking fear, it is about hacking ourselves. We all have different fears. What I fear might be completely different than what you fear. My act of courage might be very different than your act of courage. And so it really goes from person to person. I think when we make those broad strikes, we actually forget about the individuals. And that's what I will talk a little bit more today. The second take-home message is this sentence. Anybody knows Greek? Know thyself, exactly. In a world, an exponential world in which, as everybody has told us today and yesterday, the information doubles every 18 months, the way out is actually a way in. And this sentence or this phrase hasn't stand any stronger than it stands now. In a world that changes so fast, in which we can't really predict where it's going to go, is it going to be a apocalypse or the rise of the robots or the complete utopia, we actually have to know thyself. From my perspective, this is really weak. So let's hold there. And then finally, the third take-home message is from Joseph Campbell, who is the grandfather, in a way, of Star Wars. He looked at all the myths, and he says one particular sentence that I like a lot. He says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And so we all have different caves that we fear to enter. And all of those caves, the darker it is, the scarier it is, they're the bigger treasure there is. And I can prove it with my life, but we won't go into detail. But there is something in it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about hacking failure. And by hacking, I mean really understanding what failure is, how it works, and how can we hack it. And we will split into 4 kind of areas that I think are interesting, that kind of bring all the psychology I've been studying, a lot of people have been studying, into 4 nice pieces. The first one is head. And so those are our thoughts, assumptions about fear and failure. The second one is heart. This is our fear of anger, or fear of whatever the emotion is. The third one is body. Our body fears. Some people say you can smell the fear. Actually, the newest research shows that we actually can smell other people's fear. So can we smell happiness. And then finally, the fears that come with other people, because ultimately we wired to be social, and what it means to be disconnected or feel like we're disconnected, feel like we don't connect with others, there's a lot of fear there. So who's ready? Okay, so give somebody a high five that you don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
I said it's going to be interactive. So we will start with head, and the head is the software. Think of it as the psychological OS. What does it run on? It runs on 70,000 thoughts that we have per day, 16,000 words that we say, our assumptions, our expectations, our biases. This is also 100 billion neurons that you have and 100 trillion connections. It is quite of a superb supercomputer. And if anybody says that human beings are irrational beings, yes, they are, but everything makes sense from the point of view of a human being. Interesting thing, if you look at this code, if you wish, a human code, if it's not inspected, if it's not understood, if you don't know thyself, somebody else will. If you don't know thyself, the brain keeps running in the loops, and there's bugs and glitches and all kinds of stuff. And so one of those interesting things is the concept of failure, because when you think about how the brain works and when you think about any concept, it's just a thought, it's just a word, it's just a concept. What happens, we take the concept, let's say failure, and we associate it with things that we remember, all the associations we have, what it means to fail. And then we associate it with memories that we had, right? Early childhood memories, the first rejection, the first job, being fired from job, the first presentation that was supposed to go well and it didn't. The first time somebody laughed at us, etc., etc. And then we throw on top of that, we throw an emotion, right? Either shame or anger or fear, whatever that is, that emotion got sparked. And you get this atomic bomb in your head and in your body and in your surrounding, most likely. And so I actually looked up, there was a speaker's dinner, I guess, here on Friday night, well, some night. And the person that was sitting next to me, he said, well, what are you going to talk about? And I said, failure. And he said, oh, the failures you want to repeat or the failures you don't want to repeat? And I said, this is interesting because we have all taxonomies of failure. What means failure to me is very different than what is failure to you. And so the exercise I want to do over 30 seconds is turn around to somebody and tell them, what is your definition of failure? What it means to fail?
Not living up to my own expectations.
That's very good. That's very close to mine. Letting other people down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. David,
You can come tell us what you want.
you've not experienced failure, so
I know exactly what
Yeah.
it is to speak.
this is out
Okay.
of control. That's interesting.
So who got some kind of surprising response or something that was weird or interesting? We all have different definitions. Yeah, excellent. We won't go through that. I mean, this can be a follow-up conversation over lunch, what failure is. But we all see it in a different way. And so many of you probably have read the book Anti-Fragile. I see that our mind also runs on apps. And those apps, in a way, are skills. And abilities that we can have and we can learn. And when it comes to failure, there are 3 crucial ones that I would say that I would prescribe, if you wish, if I was your mind doctor. The first one is permission. We train through the schooling system to ask for permission, right? We excuse ourselves to go to bathroom, we excuse ourselves to get out of the table, leave the conversation. What happens with self-permission? And one of the fundamental things is self-permission. The second one is confidence. Confidence is the magical sauce that turns thoughts that exist and vision that exists in our head, and the 70,000 thoughts of how life could be great and how we could innovate and we can create the next Uber into actions. And very often, as you probably know, there's a disconnect between what we think and what we do. And so confidence is that piece, is the psychological skill that actually gives you that rocket fuel to actually go and make things happen. And then finally, the final one is forgiveness. And that's mostly self-forgiveness, right? We ask others for forgiveness. How many times and how much self-forgiveness do we need for ourselves? And so those 3, and I won't go into detail. Maybe I will go into that during the hotspots tomorrow. But I think those 3 are very important. Moving on, we're going to move into the heart. How many of you have seen this movie? How many of you felt sorry for fear? Right? Fear was this little thing that was just there, trembling and passing out every time anything would happen. Those are basic human emotions. As you see, we have 4 to 1 in terms of negative ones to positive one. There's a reason for that. And yes, fear is very evolutionary basic, but it also evolved with us. And in a way, it's impossible not to feel fear, because otherwise we'll clearly get ourselves into situations that are not smart. But it really is about our relationship to fear. So when you think about saber-tooth tiger, you can fear or you can walk it. And it literally is about our relationship to fear. And research done at UCLA says that if you name it, you can tame it. If you're able to actually put words, vocabularize what you fear and what is this fear, it stops being you, aka I am fear, into I am experiencing fear, and this is my relationship to fear. So if you don't feel like walking your fear, you can also befriend it. And so it turns out that in 1920s in South America, United States, there used to be a big thing to take pictures with alligators. Interesting enough, it was mostly girls when you Google it, it's mostly girls taking pictures with those alligators. And so you can ride the alligator, you can walk the alligator. So many things you can do with your fear. You can make it to pull you, right, places. Or you can walk it, you can ride it. The third piece of fear I want to talk about is the fear that's very, very fundamental to us, and we sometimes forget about it. And this is the fear of death. And as you probably know, in Silicon Valley, in the transhumanist movement, singularity movement, there's excitement about uploading the consciousness and AKA living forever onto the cloud. From my perspective, as somebody who studied genocide, who's somebody who lived and worked on a lot of communities, and that did a lot of research on the darker side of the human nature, death puts a lot of things in perspective. And I wonder what would happen if we actually take it away. And so one of the ancient ones that talked about death was actually Seneca. And he said, the part of life we really live is very small. For the rest of existence, not life, but merely time. Oscar Wilde said, to live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. And so the question between existing and living, and what actually death does to it, and how it makes us make different decisions, how it possibly makes us spend time with their loved ones, because we know this might go away, that's a very fundamental human fear, and yet one that puts a lot of things in perspective, and it serves a purpose. And then finally, I want to talk about other people, because as a social psychologist, I have to tell you, it's really the others that rewire us. We born and raised and bred to be social animals. In other words, when you look at some of the neuroscience, it literally shows that we are wired to be connected and to be social, and to belong, which is one of the fundamental human needs. Up to a point that the brain has developed neurological circuits that overlap between physical pain and emotional pain of rejection and feeling alone. And so people, and And that kind of ties into the quantified or exponential health. Yes, a lot of diseases come because we eat stuff or whatever. A lot of the diseases, from my point of view, come from the fact that we're disconnected, that we feel lonely, that we feel alone, that we feel left out. And then nature has developed neurological circuits in our brain over millions of years to make us stay with others. Because if we don't, it hurts. It literally hurts. So this is the research done at UCLA by Matt Lieberman. And so the question is, who is programming us? How do we know we have failed, in other words? And Eric Hofner has a beautiful quote that says, when people do as they please, they usually imitate each other, right? So we compare ourselves to others. We measure ourselves against others. And I think that's interesting because in psychology, we call it social comparison. We can compare up or you can compare down. You can compare to others, but really the best way of comparison is comparison over time, us comparing ourselves to ourselves and our progress. And so the final piece I want to say here is find your tribe. And I think this is a tribe already that has formed here of people who will push each other, people who will probably change the world. And the question, if you find your tribe, and I hope you will on this conference, is have your friends asked the question that Abraham Lincoln asked? It says, my great concern is not really whether you failed or not, but the question is whether you're content with your failure, because it's a piece of life, and I wish you all good, exponential, wonderful failures so that we can all rise up together. So thank you.